Hi everyone, welcome to the Mental Health Awareness event organized by IEEE Women in Engineering Victoria section in collaboration with the IEEE student branch of University of Melbourne. So I think all the participants have muted themselves, but if you haven't, please mute yourself. You can unmute when you want to ask a question, or you can also post your questions in the chat. So I'm Manisha, I'm a committee member of the IEEE Women in Engineering Victoria section. And today we have Ms Niharika Hiremath, who is a mental health commissioner with the National Mental Health Commission's Independent Advisory Board. I'll speak a bit about Niharika before I hand over to her to carry on with the rest of the event. So Niharika has seen with personal experience the impact that quality mental health support can have, and she's committed to improving the well-being of all Australians. She has held various roles as a youth mental health representative, including on the Headspace Youth National Reference Group and also as a CALD peer support worker. In addition to her role at the National Mental Health Commission, she is currently holding a role with the Youth Participation Team at Headspace National Office. So thank you for joining us, Niharika, and I'll hand over to you to carry on with the rest of the event.
Perfect. Thank you, Manisha, and thank you for the rest of the organizers for having me today. I will get started by sharing my screen. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so welcome everyone to Empower Your Mind. I'm Niharika Hiremath, as Manisha mentioned, and I go by she, her pronouns. Oh. Okay, let me figure out. Oh, there we go. We're moving now. Great. So I just wanted to begin by acknowledging the owners of the traditional lands that we're meeting on today. So I'm coming to you from Victoria, so the lands of the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and to pay respects to elders past, present, and also emerging, whilst acknowledging any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people in the room. Yeah, it's a really difficult time, as we will get talking about, and I think it's especially important in all of our lines of work to really strongly acknowledge how we can better serve the traditional owners of this country. Cool. So what are we covering today? Basically, we're going to start with a quick check-in with you guys, and then also start chatting a little bit about what mental health and well-being actually is. We'll talk a little bit about how it relates to what's happening in the world right now, and how to look after our own mental health now and ongoingly. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own story and my own journey. And then I'd love to open it up to you guys and answer any questions you may have, and also just facilitate a bit of a discussion. So I'm just going to start by checking in with all of you. I do acknowledge that a lot of this stuff is pretty heavy content, and it is a difficult time right now as well. So I just want to encourage you, if you need to step out of the meeting, it's a little bit easier when we're on Zoom. If we need to step out of the meeting, just take a minute or so, get some water, whatever it is that you need to do. Absolutely do that, and feel free to message me personally, or if I can also refer to maybe Manisha as well if there's any issues, and yeah, take the time that you need. I think it's especially important in times like this to really look after yourselves and generally as well. So I really just encourage that strongly to begin. Oh, noises are being made. All right, great. So another little note about today. I know we've only got an hour, and so I really just want this to be less of a lecture and much more of a discussion. I found that often talking about these things, again, doesn't really seem organic when it's one person kind of talking at you for a long time. Now, that being said, I am going to talk at you for a little bit, but yeah, at the end of it, any sort of questions that you may have, even if you feel that it's easier for you to maybe share. I'm pretty sure that Zoom has like an anonymous chat function, or you can share directly to me. So if there's a question that you prefer not to share in front of everyone else, but you would like answered, feel free to send that through. And then you can also send questions throughout, and then maybe we can go through them at the end and have a bit of a chat about that. Cool. Every time. All right, here we go. Okay, cool. So I guess, and I'm aware that this is a little bit more awkward when it is Zoom. And so I'm just gonna go through this bit pretty quickly, and then we can always open it up later on I guess this slide just more about acknowledging the fact that there is sort of varying levels of information and knowledge about mental health and well-being in general. And yeah, any questions that you may have, any issues that kind of come up for you throughout the process and afterwards, I really sort of encourage you to ask those questions as you need to. I think I want to start by chatting a little bit about sort of what mental health and mental well-being actually looks like. I understand that there is a lot of, I guess, misconception about what sort of mental illness is and how it affects people and different people and that kind of thing. And I guess would like to start with really acknowledging the fact that there is mental well-being, there are mental health challenges, and there is also a mental illness. And the fact that they all exist and the fact that they are actually all different and not really what you would expect. And I encourage you really strongly to maybe think about what, I guess, the notions of all of these things have kind of come across for you, and you know, how they've kind of impacted you and sort of, really kind of played a role in your life. And I guess my lead-in for that is to really just talk about the fact that everyone has a mental health. You know, the way that you kind of go about living your life, the kind of work that you do, your interpersonal relationships, all of these things really can impact your mental health, and your mental health can impact those things. And actually, I guess the first step to having an open discussion about this is to really acknowledge that notion of the fact that, you know, there is a mental health that exists for everyone. And I guess, you know, the lead in from that is to then talk about mental health challenges and how they might arise for different people at different points in their lives. You know, whether that's grief or loss, whether that's what's a lot kind of going around at the moment is the anxiety and the stress of sort of what's happening in the world, and especially today's climate. These are just a few of the things that we're dealing with right now, whether that's indirectly or directly. And I think, you know, especially with COVID, definitely directly, it's probably one of those things that has really impacted every single person, irrespective of their interface with the health system, and with mental health and well-being in any real capacity. And I think just, acknowledging the fact also that this really just makes existing internal and external stresses that people have kind of faced even worse. So, you know, the normal day-to-day stresses of life, stress that arises from work, from interpersonal relationships and the difficulties with that, and sort of, you know, negative experiences that people might have. These are already things that cause stress in your life, and acknowledging the fact that what's happening in the world right now, even if it isn't directly impacting you, still can have a role in sort of exaggerating those stresses. And look, this manifests in a lot of different ways. So it's not just necessarily, like I said, a direct impact. I mean, it might mean that there are changes to, you know, how much you're eating, how much you're sleeping, whether that's too much or too little. It also translates to, you know, unable to concentrate or focus. And I think that's especially true of us in the professional space, and having that sort of impact your work and you know, what I was mentioning before in terms of, for some people, including myself, I'm now having to study and work my 3 jobs in the same space, in the same house, and how that kind of, you know, translates to how much you can concentrate and the quality of your concentration. It can also kind of manifest in physiological symptoms. So stuff like shallow breathing, your heart racing, and kind of that fuzziness that you might feel, like the stomach aches. I mean, you know, it really, there's a wide range of ways that it can kind of manifest. And it's not necessarily just those physical symptoms, but also the psychological ones. So, you know, thinking about what's sort of happening in the world, and overthinking about those things, ruminating on and being worried about certain things, and also having it affect your mood as well. But I think, you know, in light of all of that, and in light of really thinking a lot about all of those ways that, you know, these issues can manifest and these challenges can manifest, which is a better word to use, I think. I just want to acknowledge that these are all so very much valid, as are any, and many other things that you might be experiencing in this strange time. And I think before, you can start about how to start looking after yourself, the first thing is to really, become aware of the fact that it's not an easy time for anyone right now. And for a lot of us, these, it wasn't just what's been happening this year. There's other things that, cause that change in the way that you live your life. And it's just really important to acknowledge that it's an important thing to think about. And I guess there are definitely and absolutely there are things that you can do to not only help yourself, but also to help others. First and foremost, I think self-care, which has really become a bit of a buzzword now. Self-care is the most important thing, especially when it comes to everything that's kind of happening right now. And I, again, acknowledge that, it's probably something that you've heard before in a lot of different and like vague ways. But, it is really just something that's very important, and we'll definitely break that down a little bit too. The other thing to think about is, sometimes what we have heard around us or seen around us, often experienced not only with our direct family, but, our histories and the way that we've kind of grown up is often internalized. And when it comes to dealing with stress and other sort of psychological things, mind-related things, there are a lot of misconceptions that exist. And, as scary as that is, I think it's also very empowering to know that, because that is usually the first step towards being able to kind of get control over those things as well. Also, just letting you guys know, I can't see any questions or anything right now, in case you are sending them. So just because of the screen sharing thing, but definitely once I stop sharing the screen, I will be able to see those things again. Oh, sorry. Noises. Right. And yeah, I mean, the way that I've viewed it and come to sort of develop my awareness around it is that a lot of fighting through those things that we've internalized and the things that, have been causing those stresses, whether it's the external things that are happening, whether it's those internal things that we've been carrying for a long time. A lot of it really comes down to self-awareness and mindfulness. And a little bit later on, we'll definitely get a little bit into how best to start fostering some of those things in your day-to-day life. And also just acknowledging the fact that this also gives the people around us the strength to fight to, I think, stigma when it comes to stress of any kind. I mean, mental illness specifically, but then also like stresses that everyone faces really day to day. And this notion that you have to kind of keep driving yourself and pushing yourself, even if your body and your mind are really telling you that you need to slow down and you need to be able to look after yourself. The first step and the second step in terms of being able to talk about those things also gives others the freedom and the space to talk about those things as well. And so, yeah, just acknowledging that it's, not always just going to be about sort of what it means for you, but also for the people that you care about and love as well. So I guess, yeah, I mean, what can you do to look after yourself? What are the sort of different ways that you can start practicing some of that self-care and other care? The first thing, and really one of the most important things, is listening to your body. So whether that's, eating well and regularly, sleeping well, making sure that you're getting not only long amounts of sleep, but quality sleep, and also kind of keeping moving in whatever way that means. Often your mood and a lot of those psychological or emotional sort of challenges that present themselves become so much worse when your body is not equipped to deal with them. And so, looking after your body is even more important. And this is not to say that just doing that is going to make all of those things go away, but it definitely goes a long way towards really giving you a better place to work from, and to really start working through some of those things. Mindfulness and meditation, again, huge buzzwords that are used a lot in this space, and in self-care especially. And yeah, I mean, I think I want to talk a little bit about sort of dispelling some of those myths as well around it, because I know that a lot of people consider meditation especially to be, like you sit down and you fully clear your mind, you're pushing all the thoughts away, and you're really just cleaning everything out. Doesn't necessarily work like that, and it's actually not like that at all. A lot of meditation apps, for example, often really get you to sit with your thoughts. And one of the most beautiful analogies that I've heard in terms of how meditation works and how the kind of things that it starts getting to teach you is to really view your thoughts as clouds sort of passing by. Often what will happen is, we will have certain things that kind of come up for us emotionally, psychologically, thoughts that are kind of coming up in your head. And, you feel the need to sort of act on them straight away. And usually the ones that are, more negatively geared, or the ones that are more sort of emotionally taxing. And the beautiful thing about meditating and teaching yourself how to sort of sit with those thoughts is realizing that you don't necessarily need to act on every thought that comes up, and you don't necessarily need to sort of process everything and then do something to sort of change it or push it away, or push all of those thoughts away, like I was talking about before. One of the most powerful things that helped me with my anxiety was really just being able to examine sort of thoughts and also physiological stuff. So stomach aches or headaches, or like the fuzziness that I would feel around my eyes, and just sort of examine them and make myself aware of them, and not sort of tie them to an emotion or tie them to something that had happened that kind of put me in a worse place. And look, for some people it comes easier than others, and it definitely is a bit of a process and a skill. But there's just so many wonderful apps out there that really kind of help you with the guided element of meditation as well. So definitely something to think about. The other thing is also to sort of psycho-educate yourself. So really kind of learning more about anxiety, about depression, about which are the two most common ones, but there's, plenty of them out there, and even just sort of well-being. So whether that's reading books or articles, seeking out people who have knowledge in the space and kind of having robust conversations with them, and not in a way of, like I mentioned, like diagnosing yourself or anyone else, but more so to just understand, I guess, the notions behind how and why a lot of those feelings come up. And as I mentioned before, it's not necessarily about the fact that, every single person is going to have a mental illness. Sometimes it's just about acknowledging that some of those challenges that might come up occasionally often are helped by having awareness around what that looks like. I know, again, with my anxiety, it used to really be very difficult for me, because I would often have really bad stomach aches. And for the longest time, I was thinking that it was a physical thing predominantly. And really recognizing and learning more about the fact that sometimes anxiety can sort of manifest in your gut, and is very strongly linked with that, and sort of starting to become aware and noticing that, often when there was symptoms or there was stuff that was kind of happening around me and my stomach would start hurting, knowing that that was an anxiety thing. And again, not necessarily in a diagnosable anxiety disorder way, but just anxiety as a concept, and having that sort of manifest really sort of helped me to, one, learn about it, but then becoming aware of it, and like I was mentioning before, detaching the emotion from the actual experience. And look, it'll come up in different ways. It'll, sometimes you will read a blog post and it'll absolutely help you understand exactly, what it is that you've been feeling and things like that. But I think the point here is that there's so much available out there, especially in this day and age, which is wonderful. So really kind of making use of those things. And yeah, I mean, look, these conversations have historically really, one, have not been had at all. And even if they have been had, is usually kind of, hush hush and in the background. And I think, thankfully, we are now moving towards an age where a lot more of these conversations are starting to happen online, and directly with people and openly. For example, this event that you're at right now. And so really just, starting to find communities. And look, I mean, you know, whether that means sort of building your own community within your personal groups, within your friendship groups, or within your professional spaces where you're given that space to sort of be vulnerable, and talk about those things, really kind of goes a long way, not only in really just like making it easier for you and your experience, but also, you know, you would be surprised how many people have experienced similar things and just don't know that because they're not talking to each other. And so, yeah, really just encouraging finding a community and talking to them openly. And of course, if things are getting really difficult, there is definitely help available out there. And, you know, I mean, in terms of what the process looks like, one of the things that we are very lucky to have in this country is the fact that you can get a mental health care plan. And this is not necessarily, like I said, specifically for mental illness. Although, again, misconception wise, people often think that it is. And it is really just about having a really good conversation with your GP about, well, this is where I'm at and this is what I'm needing. And, you know, I mean, I think really kind of dispelling a little bit of that shame around seeking help. And I understand that this is not easy, but also it is very, very important. And, you know, I just wanted to point out as well that in the current climate too, very recently in Victoria, they have now extended this to 20 sessions per calendar year that are subsidized. And so it's just something to keep in track if that is something that you want to look at too. There are certain organizations that do other types of work beyond Blue, and yeah, a couple of the other organizations online are the information sharing ones, and those are good places to go for the psychoeducation stuff that I was talking about earlier. And there are some on the ground services like Headspace, specifically for 12 to 25-year-olds. So it's just a means of, I guess, yeah, finding that information. And again, it's definitely available out there. It's just a means of looking for it, I guess. And I'm more than happy to have a chat with people about that too, if you had any questions about that. I'm aware that I've been talking a lot. I'm nearly done. Cool. All right. I guess, yeah, I just wanted to make a quick point as well. If you do start seeing someone, a psychologist, a social worker, any sort of type of mental health professional, people often will have a bad experience, especially because it takes so much sort of internal effort to kind of get yourself there. And having that bad experience initially means that they often give up. I remember the first psych that I saw really had a really strong focus on family stuff, and I think that was great, but at the time that was not what I needed. And just, yeah, recognizing that if, you know, having one bad experience doesn't necessarily mean that it's not for you, and sometimes it can take some time to find someone that you gel with, and it's a very personal journey, but, you know, it can definitely, yeah, be made easier. So definitely don't give up if you don't gel on the first go. A couple of other things to think about, and, you know, I would love to take questions and start a bit of a discussion on some of these things. I think, especially right now, you know, a lot of what I've been seeing on social media, and really just, yeah, in the general media, to be honest, and a lot of the conversations that I've been having have been around, you know, like, make the most of this time, you know, make sure that you're exercising and you get everything that you've done that you wanted to do, and like find all of these new hobbies and like really move forward with all of the things. I think just being very aware that it is a very difficult time right now, and just kind of being aware of the tendencies that you have, but also just making sure that you're giving yourself that self-compassion. It's not necessary to be super productive constantly all the time, especially right now when there's just so much of an emotional toll that's being taken without you even realizing. And so just, yeah, kind of being aware of that and looking after yourself in that way. And I guess that leads into the next one as well, about having expectations of yourself. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own experience and my own journey. And one thing that I really struggled with, and has taken me a long time to kind of make peace with, is the fact that I don't need to hold myself to a super high standard all the time. And I think this is especially important when you're, again, in the professional space, because, you know, there's all of these sort of factors that are impacting you. It's not just about you and the way that you're working. It's about the team that you're in. It's about the work that you're doing. I understand that there's a lot of pressures. I myself am now in a national mental health organization, and it's been really interesting to see how, you know, my own mental health can impact other people's, and how theirs might impact mine. And I think just giving yourself the space to say that it's okay, that you don't have to hold yourself to this particular standard all the time, and that only makes you human, often means that you kind of are giving yourself that breathing room to then show up, you know, tomorrow or next week or next month healthier and more able to do the work that you want to do. That's something to really think about. Um, and the other thing is also just kind of being present. Right now, I was reading this wonderful book that was talking about an area in the brain, which is called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, I think. And basically goes by the nickname the timekeeper. And essentially, yeah, is able to understand and kind of make sense of how time functions in your life. So whether that's what's happened in the past, that's what's happening in the present, and kind of what's happening in the future. And one thing that I was reading a little bit about was the fact that, you know, I mean, a lot of people have been asking, for example, for Victorians, why the first lockdown is so different to the second lockdown. And I think a big part of it was being able to acknowledge that there was sort of like a finite boundary around when that first lockdown was going to end. And so even though you were in a difficult period of time, and it was, you know, you were adjusting to the fact that you were at home, there was sort of some reprieve on the horizon. And going into lockdown again, and the uncertainty of when things are going to open up and what that's going to look like, really just, yeah, it becomes very difficult. And so, you know, at the moment, especially for us Victorians, there's a lot of sort of anxiety around not only what's happened in the past and what's kind of led up to this moment in time, but also what's coming in the future, what the rest of the year is going to look like, what next year is going to look like, in so many elements, you know, not just our work, but our personal lives. I was an avid traveler, so I'm itching to leave the country, which obviously I can't do right now. And so I guess, yeah, all of that kind of coming into this notion of really all we have control over is the present. What are we doing in the present? How are we staying in the present? And this is not to say you can't plan for the future and think about those things, but it's being able to recognize when that future planning is having more of an adverse effect than a positive one. And how do you start to harness some of that being present and being grounded here? So just a couple of things to think about. And yeah, I mean, I guess ultimately all of this stuff really starts with self-love and self-compassion. I know when, you know, again, when you're in a field and when you're in a mindset where, you know, your work is very important to you and you're kind of moving forward on that, it's really easy to kind of forget. I mean, even for me being in this field, it's taken me a really long time to find that balance between working hard and being passionate about what I do, and also being able to look after myself and love myself and give myself the space to feel that compassion. And, you know, for me, it was also recognizing that I wanted to be able to continue giving and serving my community. And the only way that I could do that is if I was looking after myself. And so, you know, just finding, I guess, that purpose behind what it is that you're doing, and really giving yourself the space to do that and feel that is super duper important. In terms of me, just a little bit about my sort of background and my story. I was born in India, and I was in India for 7 years. The first 7 years of my life was in New Zealand for 2 years, and then I've been here since. And, you know, came out of high school, and there was a lot of sort of family stuff going on, but also just a really bad sort of relationship breakdown and a lot of other external factors that really kind of affected me quite negatively, especially in terms of my mental health. And so, yeah, and often, you know, people talk about lived experience, and I started volunteering with Headspace. So Headspace is our national youth mental health foundation. So we've got 110 centers across the country, servicing 12 to 25-year-olds. And, you know, I started doing some volunteering work with them, and realized that I really wanted to sort of be in this space and help other people, young people like me, who had kind of had similar experiences and didn't have a lot of that sort of community or societal support, one, again, because a lot of these things are not openly talked about, and a lot of that stigma and all of that, and ended up joining the national office at the end of 2017, and doing some work with their national reference group. And since I've just, like kind of taken on a couple of different roles. So I was working as a culturally and linguistically diverse peer support worker in the Dandenong and Narre Warren headspaces. So I was working with young, diverse people specifically. And a lot of that was around using my own lived experience to kind of build a relationship with young people and get them, encourage them to kind of seek help. Depending on their circumstances, a lot of the young people I was working with were refugee or asylum seeker young people as well. And then as of last year, I joined the National Mental Health Commission's Independent Advisory Board. So I kind of give feedback, on youth-related topics and culturally and linguistically diverse related topics, as well as sort of that lived experience role. In terms of my study, so my undergrad was in biomed and commerce. I've pretty much done every degree that you can think of. And I did my graduate diploma in psychology last year. And now I'm doing my master's in social work, and just, trying to find a way to give back to the community that supported me when I needed it. And also to a lot of those people and young people who really have not really had the support that they've needed. So that's a little bit about me. Cool. So I realized that I definitely went over how much time I'd allocated to talk about these things, but would absolutely love to hear any questions, any reflections on anything that I've talked about, anything that's come up for you guys. Maybe, Manisha, is there a good way of doing this? I'm going to stop sharing the screen now.
So if anyone has questions, I think they can unmute themselves and ask, or they could just post it in the chat, and then we can have a look and answer that.
Sounds good. Good plan.
Oh, beautiful presentation, Niharika.
Thank you.
Niharika, I have a question. Yeah, lovely to hear your story and to know what you're doing and giving back to the community. It's one of the fantastic things you can do. So good on you, and for such an early start, it's really good. My question was, just considering that when the time you were here in Australia and now, do you think the issues around mental health are increasing or kind of more or less stable, and what could be the reasons?
Great question. I would say yes and no, which is a very complicated answer to that question. Yes, in the sense that I think there's a lot of different factors that are impacting people that can sort of have an adverse effect on their mental health. So stuff like social media, the internet, and if we were to talk about timely topics, COVID, Black Lives Matter, all of those external things, and the development of those definitely can have an impact. But the reason why I say no is I think it's also about the fact that many people have experienced this for a really, really long time. And the stigma around talking about these things has meant that people have not been able to talk about it openly. So as much as I acknowledge the fact that, yes, there's a seeming increase in it, I think it's also worth acknowledging the fact that so many of these issues and these challenges have been around for so long, but have not been talked about openly. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, yeah, that's very well said. I think you answered to the point that perhaps the issues were there earlier, but kind of people didn't know about them. We were not aware that this is a problem, and hence perhaps they were just brushed off because we didn't have the answers and we didn't have even the knowledge to even address them. Thank you.
No worries. I'm just having a look at the chat. So in developed countries like Australia, mental health is a bigger issue than developing countries. Do you think that this is true? And if so, why? Great question. I actually was in India at the start of this year. I spent some time at NIMHANS in Bangalore, which is the National Institute for Mental Health and Neurosciences. And this was also a question that I had, not in as many words, but more so just kind of before going into that experience and kind of learning more. I don't think necessarily that it is a bigger issue in developed countries. I think it's more that there are different factors and different things that affect people in sort of both of those settings, and how you kind of start to really break it down in a way that isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to that. I think absolutely there is benefits to being in a country like Australia where people can talk about these things openly. A lot of the work that we're doing at the Commission at the moment is one of the things that we're working on is called the National Workplace Alliance. So we're working with 11 really big companies and hopefully expanding that as well to really providing a framework to those companies about how mental health is dealt with in the workplace, and what that means for employees and employers. And, you know, if you think about a lot of the conversations that are happening in developing countries, that's probably not something that's yet kind of to happen. So I think there's different issues and there's different, I guess, benefits to both of those things. I don't know whether it would be right to say that either one is bigger than the other. At the end of the day, we're all finding the same beast, I think. So yeah, I'm sorry if, I don't know if that's answered your question. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Awesome. Please recommend sites that can guide one through meditation, especially for someone who hasn't done it. Perfect. Awesome. I can recommend a couple of things. There's a few of them. The thing is, they all have different presenters. They all have different ways that they kind of go through the meditations. So if the ones that I've found don't work for you, it's also just about maybe looking up some Google websites. A lot of them, there's like top 10, top 20 lists. One that I've found that is really working for me and I've been using for like 4 years is called Calm. Basically, I think the free version has something called the 7 days of calm. So they've basically got like a meditation that you do every day. It's only about 10 minutes and it's guided. So there is periods of silence in it, but a lot of it is that person kind of talking through how to start thinking about these things. So Calm is really good. A couple of the other good ones that I've heard of is Headspace, the app, not the organization that I work for, two different things. It's been very confusing. Headspace, Smiling Mind is another really good one. Smiling Mind, I'm fairly sure, is actually Australian. So when I first used it, had a lot of really strong Australian accents, which for some people works, didn't quite work for me, but I would definitely give it a shot. And Smiling Mind is quite good because if it kind of like also splits the meditations up into specific demographics. So one thing that I loved that they did was that they had like a page that had all of like the different ages. And so it was like if you're 3 to 5 and then if you're 5 to 7 and that kind of thing. So if the meditation is for kids, for example, which I really highly recommend, that's a really good app because it kind of tailors it to the demographic. I hope that's been helpful. There's also some really good ones on YouTube as well. So it's a lot about just kind of doing some exploring and finding them. But just, yeah, making sure that they are ones that really focus on sort of the mindfulness aspect of it rather than the clearing your mind aspect of it. Oh, cool. Yeah. The one actually one. Nice. That one too. You would think. That's a really good question. So what's the difference between Headspace, the app, and the company? Aren't they the same? So very confusing. So Headspace, the app, is an American company that is a meditation app specifically. And I think now they also do some work in workplaces as well. So they run some courses and stuff online. Headspace, the company that I work for, is our National Youth Mental Health Foundation, which is a not-for-profit that does specifically is based here. We have a couple of Headspaces across in different countries, but predominantly in Australia. So at the moment we've got 110 centers. And the idea is that it's a community mental health place for young people. So it's not just the 4 pillars that we work with: mental health, physical and sexual health, alcohol and other drugs, and vocational help, so career and job and study support. But essentially, it's like a holistic service for supporting young people, so specifically between the ages of 12 and 25. And as I was mentioning, the 10-session model, under that and using the mental health care plan, the sessions at Headspace are completely free. And unfortunately, psychologists and social workers and et cetera, are not super cheap. So it's very, very accessible for young people. But that's a really good question and one I get asked a lot. So that's fair. No worries. I'm gonna take a water break.
Thanks for your nice presentation, Niharika. I have a question about, like, do you have any suggestions or the tips for students who are working from home at the moment, and especially for the ones who are staying inside lockdown and they are continuously working, say like there's no difference between bedroom and workspace or something like that. So how do you think that you can suggest, can you suggest them some best tips to define dedicated space in the little space what they have?
Yeah, sure. Really good question. I can definitely tell you about some of the things that I've heard and some of the things that I've tried to do. I think the first thing is acknowledging that it's a difficult time and place to be, and situation to be in. I think the first couple of weeks I was sort of like, this is fine, and actually this is a really good thing because this means that I can have more time, that I don't have to spend traveling, and it's still a difficult time. What I found really works for me, I don't know if you have come across something I'm trying to remember the author's name and I really should know it, but I can't remember. But basically the concept is called deep work. And the author talks a lot about really breaking your work down into sort of sizable periods that are clearly defined and have things that aren't work and aren't sort of that mental focus stuff outside of those times. And I think one thing that I really struggled with, again, was that concentration piece, especially being in the same place at the time. So being able to really break down your work day or your study day into periods. What works for me is 45 to 50 minutes of work. And even if I don't feel like I need to take the break, I take the break anyway. So I take like a 5-minute, just like walk around the house, or if you've got a backyard, or walk around the backyard. And even just kind of that quick reset really helps a lot. The other thing is also having routines. I think having a specific sort of routine that builds those breaks and that sort of sectioning into your day. So a friend of mine, one of my colleagues, what she does is that she will get up in the morning and she will shower, and then she'll take a walk around the block, and then she'll come and start her work. And even though it's in the same place, for her, it's like, I've gone outside and I've come back. And that kind of time that you usually get when you, for example, traveling into work on the tram or train or whatever, just to kind of, again, have that sort of refresher, really kind of works for her. And she told me that she would really struggle because she would roll out of bed and then start working. And then you're not really there, like your mind's still in bed, you know? And so just, yeah, giving yourself little sort of habits like that can really help. What I do in the afternoons, which is usually the time where, so my workspace is set up right next to my bed. And I get really sleepy after lunch. So I'm like, you know, and then I look over, yeah, right, you get it. And so I would look over and be like, maybe I can just have a nap. And so what I do at that point is I'll try and build my exercise in around that time. So I might go out and do some yoga, or I might, again, go for that. I think now it's the 1 hour that's available for Victorians. So maybe building, yeah, that exercise time, and then I'll come back and have a nice shower, have a cup of tea, and then kind of come back to it. So I think, yeah, one is really kind of breaking it down into those smaller portions, but then also acknowledging that some days you're going to want to nap and you're going to nap. Some days you're not going to be able to focus, and just kind of giving yourself that space to just do what it is that you need to do to really just get through this time, I think is really important.
That was awesome, and that was inspirational. I would also ask you, to actually throw some light on this pandemic talk, like without our knowledge, subconsciously we talk about the number of rising cases around and the number of growing cases with our family. Indirectly, some way, subconsciously, we are getting that negativity inside. So if you could throw some light on that, it would help us.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I know I sound like a broken record right now. I think one of the things that I was reading, a really well-known counselor was talking about this notion of control. And often in situations like this, people, one of the, I think the stats that she was talking about was the amount of people that experience trauma or like post-traumatic stress, PTSD with this type of stuff rises in situations like this. And one of the predominant reasons why is because you don't feel like you have a control over the situation, right? And often you tend to try and grab at that control by looking at pieces of information, by looking at the news and social media, being on top of the numbers and like how it's rising and how it's not rising, and all those things, and a lot of that misinformation that's being spread at the moment as well. I would say that it's not going to be a one size fits all, but one thing that has really kind of helped me is not only being present to what's happening now, but also kind of being accepting of what's happening right now. The way that I've seen it is that like a lot of what's sort of happening out there, there's very little things that you can do to control the situation. And how do you separate those things? For example, staying indoors, washing your hands, all of the things, if you need to go out, being aware of all of those social distancing rules. And those are the things that you can control, but kind of separating that from what's out of your control. For example, the number of cases, not in your control. Unfortunately, despite living in a democracy, being able to go outside or not go outside, not really in your control, right? So those kind of things. I think, yeah, a lot of it is just acknowledging those things and then giving yourself the space to really step back from that as well. So I'm not saying that it's going to be easy, and I'm not saying that this is just a means of like recognizing that and suddenly everything's dandy and you're fine. I think it's just whenever you can consciously, one thing that I find now, I have disabled like the websites, as in I can't access the websites that count the cases. And if I'm doing that, then it's like maybe once a day when like, the premier is speaking or whatever. So building boundaries around how often you're reading the news, how often and look, I mean, naturally these things are going to come up, but I think as soon as one person starts doing it in a group of people, in terms of not talking about it or talking about other things, then you eventually start sort of building that notion of, okay, these are things that are happening, yes, and important to be aware of. But for me, it's like, what's the purpose? Like me knowing the number of cases today, what will it do apart from make me upset, So really kind of stepping back. And the being present and the mindfulness stuff really helps in this case as well, because, for again, consciously, subconsciously, your mind is like, well, these are the cases. And then you kind of go into that rabbit hole of, that's really scary. Oh, this is not going to change. Oh, like you start kind of running away with it. Whereas like, if you're able to start recognizing that as a thought, acknowledging that's the number of cases, it's not a good time, and then letting it pass like a cloud. And again, I'm not saying that it's going to be easy, but really making a conscious effort at doing that means that over time it gets easier and you're not sort of running away with the emotion of it. Because ultimately, I mean, the way that I see it is that you are not in a position to actively change what's happening right now, but you are in a position to actively changing how you react to it, whether that's today or over time. So how do you kind of build those habits in? Sorry, I don't know if that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No worries.
Okay, thank you, Niharika, for the presentation. I just have a question in my mind. So I think like most of the time, if we are depressed or if if we have anxiety issues, we try to deal with those on our own most of the time. But at what point would someone know that you really need help from someone or talk to someone if you have an issue like that?
Sure, that's a really good question. I think the answer is different for everyone, but the way that I see it is the earlier that you are able to start making yourself aware of that, and kind of getting the help for that, the better. And a lot of these things are like anything else in your life that's a negative thing, right? If you have a sore knee from exercising, you wouldn't keep walking on it and running on it and have it get worse, you know? And often people kind of treat mental health and mental well-being rather, and physical well-being as two different things, but I see it in the same way. So if you are, yeah, I mean, I would say as soon as something starts to not quite sit well with you, even if you're feeling like, well, no, like this is not bad enough to see someone, I suggest seeing someone anyway. And the worst thing that can happen is that, you know, someone tells you that like there are quick fixes for this, you know, whether that's changes to your sleep or your appetite, for example. Which, you know, on the surface may seem just like, oh, well, you know, whatever, that's fine. Sometimes you go through periods where you don't really sleep that much and stuff like that. If you're finding that it's kind of prolonged, it's just better to try and address it initially, than to kind of leave it for longer. So, you know, I mean, often people say like, it's better to ask a question than to stay a fool for a long time. And it's not the same thing here, but that's what I mean. Like, I think it's better to preempt something and have it be something that's like easily solvable that you can kind of deal with, than to, I guess, convince yourself that it's not a serious enough problem to kind of seek that help. And look, I mean, that can look like different things. It doesn't necessarily mean that your first protocol has to be a GP, or a psychologist if you're not comfortable with that. Maybe it's about you know, doing some of that psychoeducation and reading up on that information. Maybe it's about, I mean, a lot of places like Beyond Blue and Reach Out and like other sort of online organizations have like chat functions where you can ask questions about, you know, certain worries that you have and things like that. So I think, yeah, I mean, and, you know, again, without diagnosing yourself and going online and being like, yes, tick, 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 yes, I must have this. No, that's not what I mean. But yeah, really kind of preempting it can be helpful in the circumstance, because it means that, you know, you're not letting it kind of get worse when it doesn't need to. So as soon as possible, I would say. And yeah, just not sort of being afraid of feeling like you're dealing with it too quickly. I don't think you can ever deal with this stuff too quickly. I think it's better to do that.
Thank you.
No worries.
Does anyone have any more questions? Okay, I guess we are anyway close to 7 p.m. now, so we can wrap it up if there's no more questions, I guess. Cool. Okay, so thank you so much again, Niharika, for the wonderful presentation and also for joining us today. And thank you everyone for participating. Hope this session was useful for all of you.
Sorry, I just want to ask,
Yeah,
how
sure.
can we be a volunteer if we want to?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of different organizations that you can volunteer through. I was just going to say as well, if you have any other questions, and Lara, if you want to message me separately about what you would be interested in volunteering with, then you guys can send it. Oh, sorry, give me 1 second. I'm going to send my email to the chat as well. So feel free to just email me directly. Questions, thoughts, reflections, funny memes. I'm open to everything. So let me know.
Yeah, thank you. Just
no worries. The more volunteers, the better, my friend. We need them.
thank you.
No worries.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you.